All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving headfirst into one of the wildest and honestly most brilliant questions we've ever gotten. It comes from a listener named Sean, and it's a thought experiment that starts with a little pun and ends up, well, on a planetary scale. Let's get into it.
So there it is, the question that started it all. A mole of moles. What on earth would that actually look like? I'll give you a small hint right now. This is going to get pretty gruesome. There's just no way around it. But before we can get to the planet-sized pile of organic matter, we have to be absolutely crystal clear on what we're talking about. We need to define our two very, very different kinds of moles. So on one hand, you've got the mole from chemistry class. It's just a unit scientists use to count atoms. And on the other hand, you have the mole, the little burrowing mammal that digs up your lawn. And depending on your point of view, it's either kind of delightful or a little bit horrifying. Let's focus on the first one, though, the unit of measurement. You see, a mole isn't a unit of weight or distance or anything like that. It's just a number. It's kind of like saying you have a dozen eggs. We all know that means 12. Well, a mole is just a word for a number that scientists use because it's super helpful for counting huge quantities of tiny things, like molecules.
And this is that number. It's also known as Avogadro's constant, or more simply, 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd power. The reason it's so ridiculously massive is because atoms themselves are so unbelievably tiny. So if you have a mole of something, it means you have this many of it. It's a number so big, it's almost impossible for our brains to really grasp. But you know what? We're going to try.
Okay, now for the fun part. Let's just start with a really rough back-of-the-napkin guess, just to get a feel for the scale we're playing with here. We're not worried about being exact just yet. We're just trying to get into the right cosmic ballpark. So let's just make some stuff up. Let's say a mole, the animal, weighs about a kilogram, give or take. And that gigantic number, it kind of looks like a trillion times a trillion, right? So maybe a mole of moles is a trillion kilograms. And it just so happens that a trillion kilograms is in the same league as the mass of a planet. So even our wildest guess tells us something huge. We're not just building a hill here, we're building an entire world. Now let's actually get precise. A standard eastern mole weighs about 75 grams. So if you multiply that by Avogadro's number, you get a total mass of 4.52 times 10 to the 22nd kilograms. Now that's just a staggering number. To put it in perspective, that's a little over half the mass of our own moon. So what if we actually tried to pile all of that mass right here on Earth? Well, the result would be a global suffocating ocean of mole flesh nearly 80 kilometers deep. I mean, that would stretch almost to the edge of space. It goes without saying that is a terrible, terrible option for life as we know it. So since bringing them here is obviously a non-starter, let's take our mole of moles out into deep space and see what happens. If we just kind of put them all together, the force of their own gravity is going to pull them into a sphere. And this becomes a really brilliant, if deeply unsettling, illustration of how a new planet would form. And as we just calculated, our new mole planet has about 54% of the moon's mass. So we're not talking about some little asteroid here. This is a significant moon-sized body created entirely from small, furry mammals. But here is where it gets super interesting. Even though it's less massive than the moon, the mole planet would actually be bigger. Why? Well, because meat is mostly water, and that's way less dense than solid rock. So this lower density means its surface gravity would only be about 1/16 of Earth's, which is actually pretty similar to the gravity on Pluto. Okay, so things are about to get really dark. The immense pressure inside this thing would liquefy the interior. The organic tissue would start to break down into a substance called kerogen, which is basically a precursor to oil. The planet's own fur becomes this massive insulating layer, trapping all the heat from the decay. And as that heat builds up, trapped gases would cause these horrific volcanic eruptions, just blasting plumes of hot meat into space. Geysers of death. Eventually, after thousands and thousands of years, the whole gruesome planet would just freeze solid. So that first answer is pretty bleak. But what if there's another way to look at the question? A way to have a mole of moles without creating a literal planet of horror? What if, instead of trying to get them all together at once, we just wait? You could take the number of small mammals on Earth right now, then imagine humanity colonizing just a fraction of the galaxy's habitable planets. Over a few million years, which in evolutionary terms is not that long, the cumulative number of moles that have ever lived across all of those worlds would eventually pass that magic number.
And that leads to this perfect conclusion. All of a sudden, the problem isn't about creating a horrifying meatball in space. The problem becomes one of exploration and patience. The one place you need is the entire universe. So after all that chaos and cosmic patience, what is the real takeaway here? Why even ask such a ridiculous question in the first place? Well, it is all about understanding scale. A number like 6 followed by 23 zeros is just an abstract concept. Our brains can't really process it. But an ocean of meat 80 kilometers deep, a planet-sized sphere erupting with geysers of death, suddenly that number becomes very, very tangible. This whole exercise isn't really about moles. It's about using a bizarre hypothetical to finally feel the true weight of a scientific mole. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The mole is just one of these massive numbers. What about a Google or Graham's number? What other absurd, visceral scenarios could we invent to help wrap our minds around the truly incomprehensible scales that govern our universe? Something to chew on.